Let this dot represent 1 acre of land. It is roughly the size of a football field at 48,000 square feet. This is what 1,000 acres will look like. Imagine 1,000 football fields put together. Now, check this out. There's this family in Kenya that owns approximately 500,000 acres of land in the country. To put that figure in perspective, the total land size of London is approximately 386,000 acres. In fact, the largest city in California and one of the largest in the entire United States, which is Los Angeles, measures approximately 321,000 acres in total area. However, just one family controls more than this in the African country of Kenya. They've managed to gain unrivaled influence over Kenya's land, business, and politics, built a vast empire of farms, banks, hotels, media houses, and industries, all while holding on to power for decades. But how did a family go from being relatively broke at independence to easily the richest in the country? I want to show you the incredible rise of the Kenyatta dynasty at the expense of the Kenyan people. From Jomo Kenyatta's presidency through the long reign of Daniel Arap Moi and into the era of Uhuru Kenyatta, we will trace how political power, land acquisitions, business ventures, and corruption allegations came to define the Kenyatta dynasty. This is the story of how the Kenyatta family captured Kenya. The story started in December 1963.
I, Jomo Kenyatta, being chosen and admitted to the cabinet in Kenya, do swear that I will be true and faithful to Kenya.
Kenya had just gotten rid of British colonial rule. The people celebrated in wild independence jubilations. Jomo Kenyatta, once a freedom fighter, became the country's first prime minister and then president. The people loved this man. He gave them hope for the future, along with promises that he would return land to dispossessed Africans. However, about a year after the independence celebrations, things quickly began to unravel. With the British colonial settlers leaving, the young nation soon faced the challenging task of redistributing land held by those departing Brits, who were majorly farmers. After several options were considered, Kenyatta's government launched something called the Million Acre Settlement Scheme, based on the willing buyer, willing seller principle. This simply means a transaction is only valid if both the buyer and the seller freely and voluntarily agree to the terms of the sale. That includes the price, of course. To make this process easier, the British government financed land buyouts, and land was sold to African farmers rather than being forcefully taken over by the government. There were loans given out for this very purpose. In practice, however, those with political connections sort of took advantage of this program. President Kenyatta and his close allies reportedly used this opportunity to acquire extensive lands during the 1960s and 1970s. Through loans and state-facilitated purchases, Kenyatta's family obtained large farms, particularly in Kenyatta's home district of Kiambu and the Fertile Rift Valley. And this self-enrichment was made possible largely due to something surprising that this ex-freedom fighter turned president did early on when he came into power. You see, Jomo Kenyatta, who was considered a father of the new nation, quickly banned all political activities and instead established a one-party state dominated by his Kikuyu ethnic group. By the late 1960s, Kenyatta's inner circle, sometimes dubbed the Kiambu Mafia or Mount Kenya Mafia, dominated both politics and commerce, occupying key posts in government and parastatals. The promise of democracy quickly faded. The Kikuyu, who made up around 20% of the population, held most of the country's important government and administrative positions. This contributed to a perception among many Kenyans that independence had simply seen the dominance of a British elite replaced by the dominance of a Kikuyu elite. Among these Kikuyu elite were close relatives and trusted lieutenants such as Mbiu Koinange, Kenyatta's brother-in-law and Minister of State. We have Dr. Njoroge Mungai, a cousin and minister, and others who used their influence to amass wealth alongside the president. Together, They invested in agriculture, banking, and import-export ventures, installing themselves as Kenya's post-colonial economic elite. In this period, land was the most coveted asset in all of Kenya, and the Kenyatta family took note of that. Soon enough, with one crooked deal after another, the family emerged as the country's largest landowner. By 1978, Mama Ngina Kenyatta, Jomo's fourth wife and first lady, personally owned around 115,000 hectares of land, that is approximately 284,000 acres, across all of Kenya. This staggering figure, cited in declassified US intelligence reports, was far more than the roughly 4,000 hectares held by President Kenyatta himself. Mama Ngina's holding included a 13,000 hectares ranch in Kiambu, 2 large tea plantations at Matu and Mango. She also had 3 estates near the Tanzanian border and another large holding at Kenya's coast. Much of this land was acquired through the willing buyer programs or as compensation deals with departing colonials. However, they were often financed by government settlement funds meant to assist landless citizens. The Kenyatta children and extended family also benefited from these deals. For example, Kenyatta's eldest daughter, Margaret Kenyatta, and Mama Ngina jointly acquired farms, and other relatives received land grants or favorable purchases. By the end of Jomo Kenyatta's rule, the extended Kenyatta family had acquired an estimated 500,000 acres of land. This made the family the single largest private landowner in Kenya. But aside being Kenya's landlords, the Kenyattas diversified into various businesses during the 1963 to 1978 period. Jomo Kenyatta, as president, adopted a capitalist economic policy, endearing himself to the West in the process. Under the banner of Africanization, Kenyan-owned enterprises were promoted, a policy that often benefited well-connected individuals. Kenyatta's family and allies used this opportunity to acquire stakes in industries such as banking, insurance, farming, and mining. By the 1970s, Mama Ngina Kenyatta had become an active investor, holding shares or interest in coffee plantations in central Kenya, a stake in ruby mining ventures, and luxury hospitality properties at the coast. For instance, the Kenyatta family developed and in some cases purchased resort properties around Mombasa and Diani, leveraging Kenya's growing tourism sector. They also ventured into manufacturing and trade, including the lucrative, even though controversial, ivory and charcoal trade. These business dealings were often shrouded in secrecy, as the first family used proxies and front companies to manage businesses, while Kenyatta focused on governance. But no matter how much they tried to hide it, some things just weren't concealed enough. Jomo Kenyatta's presidency was marked by patronage politics. He rewarded loyalists with public land leases, import licenses, and government contracts. This helped facilitate wealth accumulation not only for the Kenyattas, but also for their political allies. High-level corruption scandals occasionally surfaced in parliament during Kenyatta's rule, such as debates about illegal land allocations and monopoly contracts. In fact, one notable example involved international trade in banned goods. According to a CIA memo from 1975, Mama Ngina and Margaret Kenyatta were probably the country's 2 largest charcoal and ivory traders, despite official bans on exporting charcoal and ivory. These first family members were allegedly granted special licenses that exempted them from the bans, enabling them to profit from ivory, which were obtained from poached elephant tusks, as well as charcoal from harvested timber. These reports, even though never tested in court, fueled public perception that the Kenyatta family abused state power for personal gain. By the mid-1970s, criticism of the uneven distribution of wealth in Kenya was mounting. University students and some opposition voices openly criticized the Kenyatta's family's riches. Parliamentarians raised questions about high-level corruption scandals implicating those in the president's circle. But Kenyatta's response was typically to silence dissent. While some critics were allegedly jailed, some potential rivals were silenced with patronage. This ensured no formal inquiries ever held the first family accountable during his tenure. However, discontent was bubbling under the surface, especially among communities that felt left out of the land redistribution, and the reasons for these grievances were understandable. You see, Jomo Kenyatta's State House was very much a family affair. Mama Ngina Kenyatta was not only the First Lady, but also a shrewd business operator and trusted confidant. Many deals and appointments reportedly had her input. Kenyatta's close relatives were positioned in influential roles. His daughter Margaret served as Nairobi's mayor between 1970 to 1976, becoming the first African woman to hold that position. And his brother-in-law, Mbiu Koinange, held a powerful ministerial portfolio and was instrumental in both policy and behind-the-scenes business deals. By 1978, the Kenyatta family's economic footprint was so large that Western observers worried it might destabilize the country. Shortly after President Kenyatta's death on the 22nd of August 1978, an urgent question arose. Would his successor allow the family to keep its wealth? Some of Kenyatta's allies attempted to change the constitution in 1976 to 1977 to block Vice President Moi, who was perceived as an outsider from a smaller ethnic group, from automatically succeeding Jomo. This effort, driven by the Kenyatta inner circle to protect their interest, failed, thanks in part to Attorney General Njonjo, who was siding with Moi. However, despite this attempted coup, when Daniel Arap Moi assumed the presidency, he publicly assured the nation and the Kenyatta family that there would be no vendetta. The feared confiscation or redistribution of Kenyatta assets did not happen. Instead, this new president maintained a cordial relationship with the Kenyattas, retained many Kikuyu elites in government, and went about his own looting agenda. Now, with an enforced sabbatical from politics, the family turned attention to growing their wealth, knowing that the new president had their back. Free of official duties, the Kenyatta family devoted the 1980s and 1990s to expanding their business empire. Mama Ngina Kenyatta emerged as one of the wealthiest individuals in Kenya, often investing quietly or through proxies. A key development was in banking. In the early 1980s, the Commercial Bank of Africa, CBA, a bank with operations in Kenya founded by a consortium of foreign banks, underwent some ownership changes. By the late 1980s, CBA was 100% locally owned. The Kenyatta family, through a holding company called NK Investment Limited, acquired a sizable stake in CBA during this period. By the 2000s, they would control about 24.9% of CBA's shares, making them the single largest shareholder. Control of a bank gave the family financial leverage and access to credit to fuel ventures in other sectors. Another major venture was in dairy and agriculture. In 1993, Muhoho Kenyatta, Mama Ngina's son and Uhuru's youngest brother, born in 1964, founded Brookside Dairy Limited. Starting as a modest dairy processing firm, Brookside capitalized on Kenya's milk surplus and the decline of state-controlled dairies in the liberalizing economy of the 90s. With the family capital and political connections, Brookside grew rapidly. Over the next 2 decades, it acquired competitors and built a dominance in the milk market. Similarly, the Kenyattas invested in real estate development. In Nairobi and its environs, the family owned large plots, some acquired in the 70s, that appreciated greatly in value. They began developing some of these lands or forming joint ventures, thereby setting the stage for projects like the massive Northland City plan on their Ruiru farm, though this would fully materialize later. The family's hospitality portfolio also expanded. Building on coastal resort stakes from the 1970s, the Kenyattas in the 1980s to 1990s acquired or developed hotels and safari lodges. They were eventually consolidated under the Heritage Hotels Group, a luxury hotel chain. Properties included iconic vacation spots, Voyager Beach Resort in Mombasa, Voyager Ziwani in Savo, Intrepid Camps in Masamara and Samburu, Great Rift Valley Lodge in Naivasha, Kipungani Explorer in Lamu, among others. Heritage Hotels became one of Kenya's leading high-end hospitality providers and a valuable asset in the family portfolio. By diversifying across banking, agriculture, real estate, hospitality, and maintaining interest in plantations and insurance, the Kenyatta family in the Moi era transformed into a sprawling business dynasty. But they didn't do this alone. During President Moi's 24-year rule, new centers of power emerged, but the Kenyatta family remained a quiet force. Moi's own proteges, often from his Kalenjin ethnic group, amassed wealth, notably people like Nicholas Biwott and others. Yet Moi kept a balance by not completely sidelining the old Kikuyu elite. Kenyatta's allies like Njenga Karume and Otto Magugu, a former minister, cultivated ties with Moi's government, sometimes acting as intermediaries to protect mutual interests. An important intersection came in the late 1990s. As Kenya's one-party system crumbled and multi-party elections heated up, Moi began planning his succession. Despite representing a different ethnic political bloc, Moi looked to Uhuru Kenyatta, Jomo's son, as a potential heir to carry the torch of the ruling party KANU. And here comes the end of the Kenyatta sabbatical from politics. This is Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, born in 1961 as Jomo's son with Mama Njina. He grew up as a privileged son of Jomo Kenyatta, but relatively out of the limelight during Moi's prime years. He was educated at elite schools in Kenya and abroad and dabbled in business, including helping manage family businesses like hospitality and a horticulture company in the 1990s. In 1997, encouraged by family and President Moi, Uhuru ran for a parliamentary seat from Gatundu, his father's home constituency. However, his famous name couldn't guarantee him this election. He lost the race, signaling that the Kenyatta aura had faded somewhat at the grassroots. But Moi wasn't ready to give up on this project. He took Uhuru under his wings. In 2001, Moi appointed Uhuru to parliament as a nominated MP and soon after to the cabinet as Minister for Local Government. This swift elevation was a grooming process. By 2002, as Moi was set to retire, he shocked the political establishment by naming the relatively inexperienced Uhuru Kenyatta as KANU's presidential candidate for the election. This move was a clear use of the Kenyatta legacy. Moi was effectively passing the baton back to the first president's family, perhaps expecting Uhuru to be malleable or to satisfy Kikuyu within the KANU party. Though many senior KANU figures balked and some like Raila Odinga defected to the opposition, the Kenyatta family was now thrust back into national politics. Uhuru's 2002 presidential campaign enjoyed state backing and significant funding, presumably drawing on family resources and Moi's networks. However, when the December 2002 election took place, Uhuru Kenyatta lost decisively to opposition leader Mwai Kibaki. It was a rare setback for both Moi and the Kenyattas. But the campaign established Uhuru as a national politician in his own right and the new face of the Kenyatta dynasty. Importantly, the family's vast wealth was by now an open part of Kenya's conversation. In 2002, opposition figures campaigned on ending decades of loot and plunder by past regimes, implicitly targeting both Moi's cronies and the Kenyatta network. This, however, didn't affect the Kenyatta businesses, which remained intact through the transition to Kibaki's government in 2003. In fact, in a gesture of reconciliation, President Kibaki, who had been Jomo Kenyatta's finance minister in the 70s, cultivated friendly relations with the Kenyatta family. The new government did not pursue any punitive actions on past wealth. Rather, Kibaki soon appointed Uhuru Kenyatta as the leader of the opposition in parliament. This was after Uhuru shifted roles following KANU's defeat. This period set the stage for the Kenyatta family's resurgence. Their empire was intact and growing, and their son was now a key player in politics, positioned to potentially claim the presidency in the future. During Kibaki's first term, the Kenyatta business empire continued to diversify their wealth. One flagship enterprise, Brookside Dairy, expanded aggressively. In 2006, Brookside built new processing plants and increased its market share by offering above-market prices to farmers and investing in distribution. By 2009, Brookside controlled around 45% of Kenya's formal milk market, a dominance later confirmed by the Kenyan Dairy Board. The company's strategy included acquiring competitors. Notably, in 2010, Brookside acquired rival Spin Knit Dairies, makers of Tuzo and other milk brands. This deal, backed by private equity, instantly increased Brookside's share. The Kenyatta business team, primarily led by Muhoho Kenyatta as CEO of Brookside, also looked beyond Kenya's borders. Brookside entered Uganda by purchasing a major stake in Samia Agriculture and Livestock Limited, and later expanded to Tanzania and Rwanda. By the early 2010s, Brookside had become East Africa's largest dairy. Through this regional integration, the Kenyatta family's wealth continued to grow exponentially. In banking, the family's CBA bank thrived during Kibaki's economic boom. Some reports suggested that Uhuru's presence in government likely helped CBA secure lucrative opportunities. Like in 2011, CBA partnered with Kenya's leading mobile operator, Safaricom, to launch M-Swari, a pioneering mobile banking and microcredit service. This product gave CBA access to millions of customers and deposits via mobile phones, dramatically boosting the bank's profits. By 2012, CBA was among the top 10 banks in Kenya, and the Kenyatta family's stake, nearly 25%, was yielding substantial dividends. In the years that followed, the bank got even bigger through mergers. The hospitality and media ventures of the family also grew exponentially. The Kenyattas acquired a media company, Media Max Network Limited, in the late 2000s, purchasing it from a struggling entrepreneur. Media Max came to own the Care 24 television channel, the People Daily newspaper, and several radio stations like Kamemi FM. Through Media Max, the family started controlling their own narratives. In hospitality, the family's Heritage Hotels group continued to generate revenue from tourism, which rebounded post-2003 after years of decline. By 2010, Heritage was doing exceptionally well, operating premier lodges and resorts across Kenya. But while business was good, politically, the 2003 to 2013 decade was not so great for Uhuru Kenyatta. After losing the 2002 election, he gradually reinvented himself. In 2005, Uhuru led his KANU faction to campaign against a draft constitution backed by Kibaki, aligning ironically with opposition figure Raila Odinga in that referendum. This led many to believe he was going to run for president again in 2007. However, as the general elections approached, Uhuru made a strategic choice. Rather than run for president, he threw his support behind President Kibaki's re-election. Kibaki, who was a fellow Kikuyu, faced a stiff challenge from Raila Odinga. Uhuru's endorsement helped rally some of the old KANU network and Kenyatta's loyalists to Kibaki's side. This gamble paid off. When the disputed 2007 election led to violence and a coalition government was formed, Kibaki rewarded Uhuru by appointing him Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in 2008. As Finance Minister between 2009 to 2012, Uhuru was at the heart of economic decision-making. He oversaw budgets that channeled funds into infrastructure like roads, energy, and etc., benefiting the overall economy and indirectly raising the value of his family's real estate holdings in urban and rural areas. Notably in 2012, he announced infrastructure projects like bypasses around Nairobi, one of which would later enhance connectivity to family-owned lands in Ruiru, that is, the North Lands. His tenure wasn't free of controversy, however. In 2010, an audit questioned the disappearance or misallocation of some government funds, a mini-scandal dubbed the Eurobond or Kenya Treasury issue. But Uhuru defended his actions and no charges were officially brought. His time at finance also coincided with a push for reform in land ownership records. Kibaki's government commissioned the Ndungu Commission in 2003 to investigate past illegal land allocations. The Ndungu's report of 2004 documented widespread land grabbing by elites since independence, including during Kenyatta's and Moa's regimes. While the report named many irregular allocations, implementation was slow and largely stalled. in part because it touched on powerful families. The Kenyatta family's historic acquisitions fell under the category of politically sensitive land questions that successive governments avoided revisiting. As a result, no action was taken to redistribute Kenyatta's lands as recommended. The politically connected and powerful continued to use their office to shield their family's ill-gotten wealth. During this period, the Kenyatta family faced growing scrutiny from civil society and international observers regarding corruption and historical injustice. In 2010, Kenya's new constitution was promulgated, emphasizing integrity and land reform. People became more bold in their demands for answers to questions about how families like the Kenyattas acquired their wealth. For example, in 2011, Forbes estimated Uhuru Kenyatta's personal net worth at around $500 million, ranking him among Africa's richest. Forbes would later drop him from the list, noting that there was difficulty in separating personal assets from the family's complex holdings. However, Uhuru consistently maintained that his family's assets were legitimately acquired and often pointed out that he files wealth declarations as required of public officials. Throughout 2003 to 2013, none of these allegations resulted in formal charges against Uhuru or his immediate family. The Kenyattas leveraged top-notch legal counsel and public relations to maintain an image of respectability. For instance, Mama Njina Kenyatta, despite being known as extraordinarily wealthy, kept a low public profile and rarely spoke to the media. This insulation made it harder for critics to personalize any form of attacks. Moreover, the Kenyattas often pointed out philanthropic activities such as educational charities funded by the family to prop up their reputation. Still, the shadow of past looting and land grabbing lingered, becoming a campaign issue for the opposition. In the run-up to the 2013 elections, Uhuru's opponents, notably Raila Odinga, frequently invoked the idea that, quote, certain families have everything while millions have nothing, implicitly referring to Kenyatta and Moa's wealth. In 2013, Uhuru Kenyatta's political journey culminated in his election as president of Kenya. This followed the formation of the Jubilee alliance between Uhuru and his rival, William Ruto. You see, Ruto was a powerful figure from the Rift Valley and had parted ways with Raila Odinga to team up with Uhuru despite their communities' clashes in the 2007 to 2008 post-election violence. Both Uhuru and Ruto had been indicted by the International Criminal Court on charges related to that violence, although charges were later dropped due to insufficient evidence and alleged witness interference. The Uhuru-Ruto ticket pitched a narrative of generational change. Even as critics labeled them the alliance of Dynasty and Hustler, Uhuru being from a dynastic wealthy family, while Ruto styling himself as a self-made hustler. They won the March 2013 election. Uhuru's ascent to the presidency marked the Kenyatta family's return to direct political power after 35 years. Uhuru Kenyatta's presidency provided an environment for the Kenyatta business empire to both consolidate and expand. Although President Kenyatta officially distanced himself from day-to-day business operations, entrusting his family members, especially Muhoho Kenyatta, with that role, the overlap between state policy and the family's economic interests sometimes became a point of contention. Like in 2019, when one of the most significant corporate moves occurred in the banking sector. Remember Commercial Bank of Africa, CBA, where the Kenyattas held nearly 25% ownership? Yeah, it merged with NIC Bank to form NCBA Group, now one of Kenya's largest banks. The merger, approved by regulators during Uhuru's term, took NCBA to the third largest bank in Kenya, with over 500 billion Kenyan shillings in assets. In the merged entity, the Kenyatta family ended up with a roughly 13.2% stake, solidifying their position as top shareholders alongside another elite family, the family of Philip Ndengwa, a former central bank governor, with 11.8%. NCBA's growth had direct ties to government and public projects. It continued to run the successful Mshwari product and later a government-backed small business loan program known as TAWI. Moreover, NCBA through CBA was a key partner in Fuliza, a popular overdraft facility for Safaricom's M-Pesa users, which disburses enormous volumes of digital loans annually. These ventures launched or expanded while Uhuru was president, and they benefited from a stable regulatory climate and state support for digital finance. In 2021, the Kenyatta family reportedly earned 625 million Kenyan shillings in dividends from NCBA alone, the single largest payout to any shareholder that year. Brookside Dairy also flourished domestically and regionally during Uhuru's presidency. In 2014, Brookside sold a 40% stake to the French yogurt giant Danone, bringing in foreign capital and expertise. Financial disclosures from that deal showed Brookside had annual sales of 15.4 billion Kenyan shilling in 2013. Regionally, Brookside built plants or distribution in Uganda and Rwanda. The Kenyatta's dairy enterprise became not just a local champion but an East African brand. In real estate, the Kenyatta family moved forward with an ambitious project known as Northland City, a proposed multi-billion shilling city development on their 11,000 plus acre estate in Ruiru, just outside Nairobi. Northlands is planned to include mixed-use residential areas from low-income houses to high-end villas, industrial parks, a central business district, schools, and many more. During Uhuru's term, the government invested heavily in road infrastructure near this land, notably expanding the Eastern Bypass and building a major interchange to enhance access to the area. Many critics pointed out this would vastly increase Northland's land value. In 2017, documents of the Northlands project were made public, and by 2022, ground preparation had begun. The development is owned by Sukari Industries Development Co. Limited and NK Management Limited, both said to be family vehicles, with directors including Muhoho Kenyatta and a close family associate, John Stuart Armitage. The synergy between public infrastructure and private gain in this case was evident. The Kenyatta government's road expansions conveniently fed into their family real estate venture. The Kenyatta family's media interests under Uhuru also saw heavy investment, although the media business environment was quite challenging. MediaMax, that is the owners of K24 TV and People Daily newspaper, tried to gain market share from Kenya's established media such as Nation Media Group and Standard Group. The family reportedly poured resources into modernizing K24 and the newspaper, offering the People Daily free of charge to boost circulation. By 2018, MediaMax was a prominent, if not top, media house in Kenya. However, being owned by the ruling family invited skepticism about its editorial independence. Toward the end of Uhuru's term, MediaMax underwent restructuring, including layoffs to cut cost of operation. But still, it remains one of the diversified Kenyatta portfolio. Then we have Heritage Hotels, which continued to operate successfully through the 2010s. They also benefited from increased tourism in Kenya. Notably, during Uhuru's presidency, the tourism sector got government attention, including budget allocations for marketing Kenya abroad. The family upgraded some of its properties, such as refurbishing the Voyager Beach Resort with new amenities. They also expanded into new niches. For instance, Uhuru's daughter, Njina Kenyatta, born in 1990, opened the Green Experience Restaurant and event space on the family's tea estate in Kiambu. This venture brought the younger generation into the hospitality business. With the president of Kenya coming from the Kenyatta family, questions of conflict of interest were inevitable. One area of scrutiny was government procurement and regulation. Though Uhuru Kenyatta declared that he had relinquished direct control of family businesses, he stopped short of placing assets in blind trust, meaning the family remained aware of and involved in their ventures. Under Uhuru's administration, some policies appeared to favor sectors where the Kenyattas had stakes. For example, the government maintained high tariffs on imported milk powder to protect local dairy, farmers, and by extension, processors like Brookside. In 2019, the Treasury even contemplated tightening these restrictions, a move that rival dairy firms alleged was driven by Brookside's interest. However, defenders argued that supporting local industry was a legitimate policy goal, not unique to milk. Notwithstanding though, the perception of favoritism persisted. A striking incident occurred shortly after Uhuru left office in March 2023, which shed light on earlier policies. The new administration under President Ruto decided to suspend imports of powdered milk to ostensibly support Kenyan farmers. This decision directly hit Brookside's operations, since Brookside imports cheap powder to reconstitute and export from its Ugandan subsidiary. Many saw it as a politically motivated move against the Kenyattas, and the fact that such a ban was even seen as a punishment implies that under Uhuru, imports had been allowed in a way that benefited Brookside's regional trade. This ban was later lifted after diplomatic talks, as it also affected other players in the industry. Large public infrastructure contracts during Uhuru's presidency, like the Standard Gauge Railway and major highway projects, were often surrounded by rumors that powerful figures took kickbacks or had indirect stakes in the projects. While no evidence surfaced tying the Kenyatta family to the Standard Gauge Railway contracts, which were funded by Chinese loans, opposition leaders frequently cited the SGR's inflated cost as an example of state capture by the ruling elite. And this is where we'll shift our focus to the investigations pointing fingers at this family. In a 2018 BBC interview, he insisted that, quote, "What we own is open to the public. If there's an instance where someone can say that what we have done or obtained is not legitimate, say so. We are ready to face any court," end of quote. Despite this stance, however, credible allegations emerged linking close relatives to questionable deals. A high-profile example was the Mafia House scandal, also called the Ministry of Health scandal, revealed in 2016. An audit of the Health Ministry found a 5 billion Kenyan shilling, approximately $50 million budget hole, and among the companies implicated was one called Sundeos International Limited. It turned out Sundeos, which received about 270 million Kenyan shilling contracts, was co-owned by Nyokabi Mutama, Uhuru Kenyatta's sister, and his cousin Kathleen Kihanya. The company, formed only months after Uhuru took office in 2013, had been awarded lucrative government tenders, such as supplying HIV patient food supplements. While the payments to Sundeos, approximately 41 million Kenyan shilling, flagged as questionable, were a fraction of the scandal, the involvement of the president's relatives was a major embarrassment. It brought the corruption issue straight to Uhuru's doorstep. Both Nyokabi and Kihanya denied any wrongdoing, and investigations by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission did not lead to prosecutions against them. However, the incident revealed a pattern. Companies associated with the first family were indeed doing business with the state. This was a conflict of interest and an unfair advantage stemming from political connections. Another allegation in this era involved Kenya Medical Supplies Authority during the COVID-19 pandemic, slightly later in 2020, where reports suggested politically connected individuals, including some linked to the Kenyatta camp, won inflated tenders for medical supplies. One of Uhuru's close allies, David Murathi, a Jubilee Party official, was named in investigations as having helped broker a lucrative PPE procurement deal, which opponents claimed implicated the first family indirectly. Murathi denied acting on the Kenyatta's behalf, but the perception of a tender prenup network around the Kenyatta administration took root. In October 2021, a significant event challenged the Kenyatta family's narrative of transparency. The Pandora Papers, a global investigative project by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, leaked millions of documents on hidden offshore assets of the world's rich and powerful. President Uhuru Kenyatta and his family were prominently featured in this project. According to the ICIJ investigation, the Kenyattas for decades had shielded wealth from public scrutiny through foundations and companies in tax havens, notably Panama and British Virgin Islands. The leaked records showed the family owned at least 7 offshore entities with assets worth more than $30 million in stocks and bonds. One of the companies registered in British Virgin Islands was used to buy an upscale apartment in central London valued at $1.3 million, which interestingly was rented out to a British Member of Parliament. Other entities held cash or investment portfolios and were registered under code names. The Kenyattas were referred to as Client 13173 by the Panama law firm managing some of these structures. Crucially, while holding offshore companies is not illegal per se, the Pandora papers raised red flags for a few reasons. First, the Kenyattas had never publicly disclosed this interest in their wealth declarations. And secondly, some entities were established in the 1990s and early 2000s when Uhuru Kenyatta was preparing to enter politics, suggesting an effort to park funds abroad, possibly to avoid any public scrutiny. Thirdly, the use of secrecy jurisdiction ran counter to Uhuru's own anti-corruption stance, where he often urged transparency. The revelations made global headlines. Domestically, Uhuru responded in his usual calculated way. He claimed the Pandora papers would, quote, enhance financial transparency, and promised that he would offer a full account of his family's offshore assets upon return from a foreign trip. However, no comprehensive public explanation ever came. It is important to note, though, that no evidence has shown that the offshore money was stolen public funds. It could well represent proceeds from decades of the Kenyatta's businesses. But this lack of transparency and the timing coming as Uhuru was finishing his presidency renewed calls for public officials to be more forthcoming about wealth. Western nations' financial regulators also took note, given the global push against illicit financial flows. Despite the momentary uproar, there were no legal consequences for the Kenyattas from the Pandora papers. It did, however, reinforce the view among many Kenyans that their leaders often have one foot in the country and one foot, or at least one bank account, quietly abroad. And while Western nations' financial regulators are always quick to criticize African leaders for these illicit financial flows, their countries are usually the beneficiaries of these giant Ponzi schemes that leaves poor nations without the necessary resources to develop their economies. Anyways, Uhuru Kenyatta's second term, which ran between 2017 to 2022, was politically marked by a major realignment. The realignment with opposition leader Raila Odinga. This unexpected truce calmed the post-election turmoil and led to a cooperation pact, the Building Bridges initiative. For the Kenyatta family, the handshake with Odinga meant a broader alliance of Kenya's prominent political families, the Kenyattas and the Odingas, who had been adversaries for decades. They now worked together. Some saw this as protecting elite interests, effectively sidelining the populist challenge of William Ruto, who was then the deputy president. In fact, the handshake indirectly safeguarded the Kenyatta-Odinga economic status quo by muting opposition scrutiny on issues like corruption. Odinga's camp toned down criticism of government graft once they were in collaboration. The Kenyatta family's partnership with Odinga, and by extension with Gideon Moa, that is son of former President Moa, who was aligned in the new coalition, was dubbed as an alliance of dynasties by critics. It ensured that no powerful voice within the government was questioning how the first family did its business. However, outside that alliance, William Ruto fashioned himself as the spokesperson for ordinary Kenyans, that is the hustlers, and accused the Kenyatta-Odinga pact of undermining the fight against corruption. Ruto leveraged public frustration over inequality, at times hinting that Kenya's wealth was controlled by a few dynastic families. This narrative resonated with some youth and poor Kenyans and set the stage for the political showdown in 2022 after Uhuru's term. Constitutionally term limited, President Uhuru Kenyatta in 2022 backed Raila Odinga as his preferred successor, explicitly attempting to block William Ruto's ascent. The campaign was bitter, with Ruto openly criticizing the Uhuru project and painting Odinga as a proxy for Kenyatta interests. Ruto's messaging of breaking the dynastic grip found fertile ground in regions like Mount Kenya, ironically Kenyatta's home turf, where some felt the Kenyatta family had not delivered broad prosperity despite being in power, in a surprise to many observers. William Ruto won the presidency in August 2022, defeating Odinga and by extension dealing a blow to Uhuru's influence. For the Kenyatta family, the loss meant a political power vacuum at the top. Uhuru Kenyatta stepped down and, to his credit, facilitated a peaceful handover, yet tensions between him and the new president were evident. In early 2023, protests by Odinga's supporters against Ruto's government saw a startling incident: the invasion of Northland's farms. On March 27, 2023, dozens of intruders stormed part of the Kenyatta's Northlands estate, stealing livestock and vandalizing properties. This was allegedly orchestrated by certain political figures as retaliation for Uhuru's perceived support of the opposition protests. As of 2025, the Kenyatta family remains one of the wealthiest and most influential families in Kenya, albeit without formal political power. The business empire is largely intact. NCBA Bank continues to be profitable, posting billions in annual profits and maintaining a top-tier status in banking. Brookside Dairy remains a dominant player in the dairy sector, though it faces new challenges from government policy shifts and emerging competitors. Media Marks and Heritage Hotels are still operational, the latter benefiting from a rebound in tourism post-pandemic. And the family's land holdings are vast, still often cited as over 500,000 acres nationwide, including farms, ranches, and prime urban real estate. Notably, Uhuru Kenyatta in retirement has spent time at a 1,000-acre ranch in Transmara, Narok, which he acquired shortly before leaving office, indicating the family is still investing in strategic land assets. And while people continue to lament the unjust wealth acquisition by the family, the Kenyattas have never been convicted or legally penalized for corruption or economic crimes. No court has nullified their land titles, no commission has stripped their assets. It's just noise and vibes, while the ordinary Kenyans continue to face the plight of hardship in the country.